Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving deep into something that's been on a lot of people's minds. We're talking about the end of support for Windows 10.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is, especially for folks with those trusty older PCs that might not be making the jump to Windows 11. We've got all the official Microsoft stuff here, plus some really insightful articles, so let's get into it.
It really makes you think about the future of those machines. They work fine, but what happens when they're not getting updates anymore?
Exactly. And let's be honest, not everyone can or wants to upgrade.
Right, upgrading can be a hassle. It costs money, there's compatibility worries, and learning a whole new system takes time.
So what are the options? What happens to those PCs on October 14th, 2025?
Well, that's the deadline. No more support for Windows 10.
Wow, that's coming up fast.
It is, and it's not just one version either. Home, Pro, all the different editions, even Enterprise and Education, they're all losing support.
We've been through this before with Windows 7 and 8.1, but it's still a big deal. I remember helping my grandma update her laptop before Windows 7 support ended. It was a whole thing.
I bet.
But for those who haven't been through it, what does end of servicing actually mean? Like, what changes?
It means Microsoft is done. No more security updates, no more fixing bugs, no more help from them.
So no more safety net.
Basically.
That sounds a little scary.
It is. Imagine your Windows 10 computer is like a city, right? Everything is working, traffic's moving, life is good. Microsoft is like the city planner, making sure things run smoothly, keeping everyone safe.
Okay, I like this analogy. So the security updates are like the maintenance that keeps the city safe and functional.
Exactly. But come October 14th, 2025, that city planner leaves. No one's fixing the roads, no one's watching out for problems, and the city becomes vulnerable.
So my safe, efficient PC is suddenly a city in chaos.
Pretty much. And cyber criminals are out there just waiting to exploit those weaknesses.
Like opportunistic drivers looking for potholes.
Exactly. Without those security updates, you're wide open to malware, viruses, all sorts of bad stuff. Data breaches, identity theft, system crashes. It's a recipe for disaster.
Okay, staying with Windows 10 past the deadline is sounding like a terrible idea. But what about people who just can't upgrade to Windows 11? Their hardware isn't good enough? Or maybe they just don't want to.
That's a real concern, and we need to talk about that.
Absolutely. But before we jump into alternatives, let's stick with Windows 10 for a bit longer. I mean, some people might think, my computer's running fine, what's the big deal? What are the specific risks if they choose to stay with Windows 10?
Let's break it down, because it's not just about security, although that's huge, there's more to it.
Okay, what else is there?
Well, remember that city with no planner. Not only are there potholes, but buildings might start falling apart, the power grid could fail, communications could go down.
So it's not just about getting hacked, it's about the whole system potentially crashing.
Exactly. Think about software compatibility. The apps you use might stop working or become glitchy because developers are focusing on newer operating systems. Your reliable PC could suddenly feel ancient.
So my trusty old PC could become like a digital dinosaur.
Right. And then there's hardware. Drivers for your printer, scanner, webcam, those might stop being updated. You could end up with devices that are useless.
Wow, so it's security risks, software issues, and potential hardware problems. It's like being trapped in that crumbling city.
And hackers are constantly finding new ways to exploit weaknesses. Staying with Windows 10 after support ends is like putting a giant target on your back.
Okay, I'm getting the message loud and clear. Staying with Windows 10 past the deadline is a huge risk.
It really is.
But let's shift gears. For those who can upgrade to Windows 11, what are the benefits? What's waiting for them?
Imagine moving to a brand new, state-of-the-art city. Everything is modern, efficient, designed for the future.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Tell me more about this digital utopia.
Well, first of all, the security is top-notch. Windows 11 was built with security in mind from the beginning. It's like having the best security system money can buy for your digital city. Better malware protection, stronger firewalls, improved data encryption.
So it's like having an army of security experts protecting my digital city.
Exactly. And it's not just about security. The user experience is completely new. Imagine a cleaner, more intuitive layout, a streamlined start menu, and an overall easier interface.
I've heard good things about the new design.
It's really nice. Plus, there are performance improvements under the hood. Windows 11 is faster, more efficient, and better at managing resources. Smoother multitasking, quicker loading times, fewer delays.
So it's not just a pretty face, it's got the brains to back it up.
Absolutely. And don't forget about the apps. Windows 11 has better integration with the Microsoft Store, so you have access to a wider range of applications, including ones designed for touchscreens and pens.
So more apps, better security, a smoother experience. It sounds like upgrading to Windows 11 is the way to go if you can.
It definitely is. But as we said, not everyone can make that move.
Right, what about those folks with older PCs who might be feeling left out? What are their options? Is it game over for them in the world of Windows?
Not necessarily. Remember we mentioned alternative operating systems. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, a lifeline for those older PCs. I'm all ears. Let's explore those alternatives and see what they're all about.
It's like finding a whole network of hidden roads and paths. You know, those scenic routes that get you where you need to go, but in a different, maybe even better way?
I love that. So we're not talking about settling for less. We're talking about discovering a whole new world with its own advantages.
Exactly. And one of those paths leads us to the world of Linux.
Okay, Linux. Full disclosure, I've always been a bit intimidated by Linux. I thought it was just for, like, super techie people. Coders, programmers, people who live in the command line.
That's a common misconception. Yeah, Linux has a powerful command line interface, but there are also tons of versions designed for everyday users like us.
Really? So you're telling me there's a Linux out there that even my grandma could use?
Absolutely. These versions come with easy-to-use interfaces, they have apps already installed, and they often run really well on older computers, which is perfect for those PCs that can't handle Windows 11.
That's interesting. So let's say I'm ready to ditch Windows and explore Linux. What are the advantages? Why is this a good path to take?
Well, first of all, security. Remember all those vulnerabilities we talked about? Linux is known for being incredibly secure.
Yeah, I've heard that, but why is it so secure? What makes Linux different?
It's a few things. Many Linux versions have strong security features built in, and there's a huge community of developers who are constantly working to find and fix any problems. It's like having a whole army of security experts protecting your computer.
So it's not just about the operating system itself, it's about the people who support it.
Exactly. And because Linux is open source, which means anyone can look at the code, it's more transparent. That means problems get found and fixed quicker.
That makes sense. More eyes on the code, the better.
Yeah.
So security is a big plus. What else is good about Linux?
Customization. Linux is all about choice. You can choose how it looks, how it feels, and tailor it to exactly what you need. It's like being able to design your own perfect digital world.
I'm starting to see why people love Linux. It's about freedom, isn't it?
Totally. And don't forget about the costs. Most Linux versions are free, which is a huge plus if you're on a budget.
Free is always a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Linux is secure, customizable, and free. It sounds pretty amazing, but let's be real, there have to be some downsides, right? Why isn't everyone using it if it's so great?
Well, there are a few things to consider. For someone coming from Windows, it might take a little time to learn how to use it. The interface is different. Some of the ways things work are different.
It's like moving to a new country. Right, you have to learn the customs and maybe a new language.
Exactly. And then there's software compatibility. While there are more and more apps available for Linux all the time, some popular Windows programs might not have Linux versions.
So you might have to find new apps or figure out workarounds.
Right. And if you need technical support, it's often more community-based. There are online forums and documentation, but you might have to do a bit more research yourself.
So it's less about calling a helpline and more about asking your neighbors for help.
Pretty much. The Linux community is really helpful, but you might need to be a little more resourceful.
Okay, so there are definitely some adjustments to be made when switching to Linux. But for people with older PCs who are looking for a secure, customizable, and free option, it seems like it could be a really good choice.
It definitely is for many people.
Now, we've talked about staying with Windows 10. Not a good idea. Upgrading to Windows 11 and diving into the world of Linux. But what about people who don't want to completely abandon Windows, but also aren't ready for Linux? Are there any other options?
There are a few other paths to consider, each with its own pros and cons.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What else is there?
One option is dual booting. It means you can have both Windows 10 and Linux installed on your computer and choose which one you want to use when you start it up.
So it's like having two operating systems in one.
Exactly. You could use Windows for the things it's good at, like gaming or specific programs that only work on Windows, and then use Linux for everything else.
So you get the best of both worlds. What are the benefits of that?
Well, it gives you flexibility. You can use each operating system for what it's good at. It's also a good way to gradually transition to Linux. You can start using it a little bit at a time and see how you like it.
That sounds like a smart approach. But there must be some downsides to having two operating systems on one computer, right?
Of course. For one, it can be a little tricky to set up. You need to partition your hard drive, which is basically dividing it up, and install both operating systems.
So it's not exactly plug and play?
Not really, and it also takes up more storage space on your hard drive.
Makes sense. You're installing two whole operating systems.
Right, and dual booting can sometimes slow down your computer, especially if it's an older one.
So you need a computer that can handle running both.
Hmm.
Okay, so dual booting is an option, but it might not be the best for everyone. What else is there?
Another option is virtualization. It means running Windows 10 inside a virtual machine on your Linux computer.
Virtual machine.
Mm.
That sounds complicated.
It's not as bad as it sounds. Basically, you create a little self-contained version of Windows 10 that runs in a window on your Linux desktop.
So it's like Windows 10 is trapped in a little box.
Kind of. And it's good for security because it's isolated from the rest of your system.
Okay, so it's like a little sandbox for Windows 10.
Exactly. And it's also good for performance because you can control how much of your computer's resources it uses.
It won't slow down my Linux system.
Right. But virtualization can still be a bit slow, especially for demanding tasks like gaming or video editing.
I bet you still need a Windows license, right?
You do. It's like having to pay rent even though you're living in a tiny house.
Okay, so virtualization is an option, but it has its limitations. What other paths are there?
Well, there's also cloud-based desktops.
Cloud-based desktops. Now we're talking. What are those?
It's basically renting a Windows 10 desktop that's hosted in the cloud. You access it through a web browser or an app.
So instead of having Windows 10 on my computer, it's running on some server somewhere else.
Exactly. And it's great because you don't need to worry about your computer's hardware. As long as you have an internet connection, you can access your Windows 10 desktop from any device.
So I could use it on my phone, my tablet, even another computer.
Exactly. And your data is stored in the cloud, so you don't have to worry about backups.
Wow, that's convenient. But there must be some catches, right?
Well, you need a good internet connection. If your internet goes down, you lose access to your desktop.
So it's like being cut off from your digital lifeline.
Right. And cloud-based desktops usually cost money. You pay a monthly fee to use the service.
So it's like renting an apartment in the cloud.
Pretty much. And you need to be okay with having your data stored in the cloud.
Yeah, data security is a big concern these days.
It is. So cloud-based desktops are a good option, but they're not for everyone.
Okay, so we've got dual booting, virtualization, and cloud-based desktops. That's a lot of options.
It is. And we've covered a lot of ground here. From sticking with Windows 10, again, not recommended, to upgrading to Windows 11, exploring Linux, and looking at these other options. The end of Windows 10 support doesn't have to be the end of the road for your PC.
Definitely not. But I have to admit, it's a bit overwhelming trying to figure out which path to take.
Yeah.
How do we even begin to make a decision? What are the most important things to consider?
That's a great question, and it's the perfect place to start our next conversation. There's no one right answer, but there are some key questions you can ask yourself to help you decide.
Okay, let's dive into those questions. What are the key factors to consider when making this decision? So how do we untangle this whole thing? What questions should we be asking ourselves when it comes to our trusty old PCs and this Windows 10 situation?
Well, first things first, think about what you actually use your computer for.
Okay, so someone who's mostly browsing the web and checking email, that's different from someone who's like editing videos or doing heavy gaming, right?
Exactly. If you're not doing anything too demanding, a simpler operating system like Linux or even a cloud-based desktop could be a good fit.
That makes sense. What else should we be thinking about?
Be honest about your tech skills. Are you comfortable getting a little technical, or do you prefer things to just work?
So if you're a command line wizard, Linux might be your jam. But if you'd rather keep things simple, maybe Windows 11 or a cloud desktop is a better choice.
Right. Linux gives you a lot of power, but it can also be a bit more challenging to learn.
It's like choosing between a manual transmission and an automatic.
Right.
Right. One gives you more control, the other is easier to use.
I like that analogy. And of course, your computer's hardware matters too. How much RAM does it have? How much storage space?
So a newer, more powerful PC could handle Windows 11, but an older one might struggle.
Totally. And if you're thinking about dual booting or virtualization, you need enough space and processing power for both operating systems.
Right, like making sure your house has enough rooms if you're getting a roommate. And speaking of practicalities, budget's always a factor, right?
Absolutely. Windows 11 might mean buying a new license, maybe even a new computer. Linux is free, but cloud desktops usually have a monthly subscription.
So there's a trade-off there. Free is great, but that cloud convenience comes at a cost.
It does. And we can't forget about security. How important is keeping your data safe?
I mean, in this day and age, it should be a top priority, right?
It really should be. Linux is known for its security, and cloud desktops usually have strong security measures too.
So it's about picking the option that gives you the right level of protection. And then, of course, there's software compatibility, like we talked about before.
Absolutely. If you depend on certain Windows programs, you need to make sure they'll work with whatever operating system you choose.
So do your research. Make sure your must-have apps are covered. Okay, so we've got a lot to consider. What we use our PC for, our tech skills, hardware, budget, security, software compatibility, it's a lot. Any last tips for navigating this whole thing?
Don't be afraid to try things out. Experiment a bit. Download a Linux version, run it in a virtual machine, try a free trial of a cloud desktop. See what feels right for you.
That's a great idea. Like test driving a car before you buy it. And there are tons of resources online right now.
Tons, forums, communities, tutorials, you name it. People are really helpful, so don't hesitate to ask for advice.
That's awesome. Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've explored the ins and outs of the end of Windows 10 support, looked at the risks, and discovered some really exciting alternatives.
It's amazing to see how technology keeps changing, giving us new options and ways to use our computers.
The key takeaway here is that you've got choices. The end of Windows 10 support isn't a dead end. It's a chance to explore new possibilities and find what works best for you.
And who knows, maybe this change will lead you to something even better.
Absolutely. Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep on diving deep.